Before we get started with today's black-eyed pea casserole recipe, I wanted to talk about a very important issue: evolution versus creationism, as it applies to cooking, of course. You see, these days, just about everything's been done already, so to say that you create a recipe usually isn't very accurate. You may have a killer chili recipe that you so-called created from scratch, but the truth is you probably didn't really create it from scratch. You didn't invent chili when you came up with the recipe. You knew that tomatoes went in it, you knew that meat went in it, etc. Most recipes evolve from other recipes. This hit me last night when I was watching a cooking show. This guy named Chris Owens did this recipe called Mama's Black-Eyed Pea Casserole, and that's what inspired me to create this recipe. It is a takeoff on that recipe. Hopefully it's one that you like. Sometimes there's a fine line between stealing a recipe and simply evolving a recipe. To me, it comes down to the intent. You know, if you look at a recipe and say, hey, if I add a teaspoon of paprika to this, I can call it mine. Well, you're not doing anyone a service doing that. However, if you're watching, if you see a recipe or you taste something and the first thing that hits you is, wow, wouldn't this be good if, fill in the blank, that's how recipes evolve. That's what happened last night. I was watching this, a recipe called for hamburger, and my wife and I were sitting there watching it, and I turned and looked at her and I said, boy, wouldn't that be good if you used chorizo instead of hamburger? She said, yeah, it would. Got to watching a little more. I said, hey, this would be really good if we replaced the jalapenos with some smoky chipotle flavor too. And on and on and on. It just kept evolving from there. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into how I get inspiration from recipes. Sometimes they come from cooking shows, sometimes they come from restaurants, sometimes they come from other people's recipes. When you're around other people's food, be it a restaurant, whatever, it's a good idea to pay attention to what's going on. Do that, and who knows, you might just come up with some great creations of your own. Thanks for putting up with that. Now let's get cooking. Over here I got my oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I got a pan that's already warmed up, ready to add our meat. Got 1 pound of chorizo sausage. Put it in the pan. I want to get it nice and brown. So I'm going to come back and stir it and break it up quite often. I'm not a big fan of big chunks. I'd rather have a nice fine distribution throughout the casserole. So while that's going, let's come back here and get to the rest of our prep work. In this bowl, I've already combined 4 ingredients. I have some store-bought mild picante sauce, some store-bought enchilada sauce, some cream of chicken soup, and some cream of mushroom soup. 10 ounces of each. So let's get to work on preparing the rest of it here. We got 2 cloves of garlic. You want to get that all minced up. Set it aside. Next, time to bring on the heat. I got some chipotles packed in adobo sauce. We want to get those minced up as well. If you're afraid of the heat, go ahead and take the time to remove the seeds from it. Since I went with mild picante sauce, I don't see a need to do that. So, we got those. I'm only going to go with 1. If you're feeling brave, go ahead and do 2. Next, let's move on to our onion. We're using 1 small yellow onion here. We want to get it diced. Okay, I'm going to keep the onions separate from the chipotles and the garlic because I'm going to cook them separately. Garlic you don't want to leave in too long on its own. The onions, they could use a little more time. So let's go over and check on our meat. Okay, our chorizo is done. What I want to do now is add the next round of ingredients. I'm just going to push that over to the side. And this sausage ended up being a lot leaner than I expected it to be. So I'm just going to add a little bit of olive oil to the pan. Give that just a few seconds to warm up. And let's add our onions. We want to cook these for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 minutes, just enough to get them translucent. Don't want to get them soggy. Let's also add 2 tablespoons of Emerald's essence and get that going. It's okay if they mix a little bit, but try to keep them separate as best you can. Okay, onions are done. Let's nudge those off to the side a little bit too. A little more olive oil. And we're going to add our garlic and our chipotles. And let those cook for about 30 seconds. Then we're going to add round 3 of the ingredients. Let's go ahead and add the 4 items that we had pre-measured earlier. As well as 3 cups of black-eyed peas. These are already rinsed and drained. Yes, I just used the canned ones. Get that stirred up together real nice. And we're going to let it simmer for about 10 minutes. The mixture is done cooking. I have my casserole dish. I sprayed just a real thin coating of non-stick cooking spray in there. I'm going to fill it halfway up with the casserole mix. I'm using about half of it. Should be enough to fill the whole dish. Just get it spread around. Over here, I have 3 cups of grated cheddar cheese. I used a medium cheddar. I'm going to spread that around. I'm only going to put half of it on. So let's add the rest. Once again, spread it around. And let's add the rest of our cheese. Okay, now let's cover that with foil. Put it into our 350-degree oven. Come back in 30 minutes. Okay, time to get it out of the oven. Get rid of that foil. Wow, looks good. Next we're going to crunch some tortilla chips on top. A whole bunch of them. Now let's get it back in the oven for 5 more minutes. Camera babe had to take a phone call, so I took it out of the oven and let it sit for a few minutes to cool off. I'm going to go ahead and scoop a little bit out of here. It's pretty runny. Don't know that it's much of a casserole. The original recipe called for layering it with corn tortillas. You might want to do that if you want to keep it together. I think I like it better without. Let's give it a little shot here. That is good stuff. Kudos to Chris Owens for making this all happen.